The wheels kissed the runway just after noon, and Diana Maxwell reached for her purse with fingers that trembled ever so slightly. She wasn't nervous. At least, that's what she told herself. Just tired from the flight, she thought. Just a little stiff in the knees from sitting too long. But deep down, something fluttered in her chest like a shy bird. She hadn't seen Jordan in almost 4 years. He'd called a week ago out of the blue saying he wanted her at his engagement party. "It wouldn't be right without you, Mom," he had said. His voice had sounded soft, warmer than she remembered, the kind of warmth that makes you forget old wounds for a moment. So she came. She'd picked out her best navy blue dress, the one her late husband used to love on her, packed a small carry-on with neatly folded clothes and a hand-decorated cake box carrying her famous lemon poppy seed bunt. Jordan used to beg for it when he was a teenager. It felt like a small offering, a peace token, a mother's hope. The plane taxied to a stop, and as the other passengers filed out, Diana took her time. Her hand smoothed her dress. She checked her lipstick in the compact mirror. Just enough color to look bright, present, chosen. The terminal doors slid open, and she stepped into the humid Atlanta air, scanning the crowd. Surely he'd be right there, smiling, maybe holding a sign that said Mom. She chuckled at the thought. She walked to the passenger pickup zone, eyes searching. No Jordan. She checked her phone. No messages. She gave it 5 minutes. 10. Maybe traffic. Maybe the app glitched. Maybe he was circling the terminal trying to find the right door. Her suitcase handle grew cold in her grip. The light drizzle in the air clung to her cardigan. She didn't want to assume the worst. Not yet. She just stood there, among strangers rushing past, holding a cake she baked from scratch, wearing the dress she hadn't touched in years, and hoping, one more time, that the boy she raised would show up for her. 15 minutes passed, then 20. Diana shifted from foot to foot, trying to convince herself that this, whatever this was, wasn't intentional. Atlanta traffic was a nightmare. Maybe his phone died. Maybe the directions were confusing. Maybe he was at the wrong terminal. She opened her texts again. Still nothing. No "be right there," no apology, just a blank screen and the slowly sinking realization that maybe she wasn't someone worth rushing for anymore. The rain picked up. Not a storm, just a slow mist that settled on her shoulders like an unwelcome shawl. Diana pulled her cardigan tighter. The lemon poppy seed cake, once proudly cradled in her arms, now felt heavier, almost foolish, like a symbol of a time that had passed and wouldn't return. She tried to call, 1 ring, 2, voicemail. "Hey, it's Jordan, leave a message." She hung up before the beep, her lips pressed together tightly, jaw clenched against the swell of something she couldn't name. Not anger, not yet, but a kind of dull ache that started behind the ribs and worked its way outward. The airport crowd ebbed and flowed around her. Families reuniting, hugs and squeals and rolling suitcases. A young girl wrapped her arms around her father's waist, laughing. A man in a military uniform kissed his wife like it was the first time all over again. Diana stood perfectly still. At minute 42, she gave up. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly. She turned, flagged down a cab with a raised hand and eyes that refused to water. The driver, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and coffee breath, popped the trunk. "Where to, ma'am?" She gave him the address of the hotel Jordan had recommended, the one near the venue, the one she'd paid for herself. As the cab pulled away from the curb, Diana didn't look back. Inside, the heater hissed to life, warming the chill that had settled in her bones. She watched raindrops chase each other across the window glass while people with umbrellas hurried by. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere. Everyone but her. She checked her phone one last time. Still nothing. No message. No apology. Not even a lie. Just silence. And in that silence, Diana heard the truth louder than any excuse Jordan could have offered. He wasn't late. He simply hadn't come. The hotel room was nicer than she expected. Soft lighting, crisp sheets, a view of the downtown skyline through sheer curtains. But Diana didn't really see any of it. She set the cake down gently on the desk, peeled off her cardigan, and sat on the edge of the bed like a statue, upright, unmoving, holding herself together with sheer will. She checked her phone again. Still nothing. She hadn't eaten since breakfast. Her stomach ached with more than just hunger. It was the ache of absence, of standing alone in a moment that should have held joy. She reached for her tablet, almost without thinking, more out of habit than purpose. Opened the banking app she'd used for years. A comforting ritual. Just check in, make sure bills are in order, control the small things when the big ones feel out of reach. But what she saw made her sit up straighter. One of the linked accounts, one she had co-signed for Jordan 5 years ago, was flagged. Delinquent. 2 months overdue. $80,000. She scrolled further and saw the familiar transactions. Loan disbursements, business expenses, travel, jewelry. Her heart thudded. She remembered the day she'd signed the paperwork. Jordan had just pitched her on a real estate investment idea. He needed her credit. "It's just temporary, Mom," he'd said, charming as ever. "I'll carry the whole thing myself after the first quarter." She had believed him. Of course she had. She'd believed him when he said the first business failed because of bad timing. She'd believed him when he said the credit card was just for emergencies. She believed him every single time he promised, "I've got it under control." And now, sitting in a quiet hotel room with a cake that no one would eat, she saw it all clearly. Jordan didn't forget her. He used her, over and over, because she made it easy. Diana leaned back, letting the weight of that truth settle. It wasn't loud. It didn't crush her. It simply filled the space between her ribs and stayed there. She had always assumed love meant giving. Now she saw the difference between giving and being taken from. The room was silent. But inside her, something cracked. Not like glass, not dramatic. More like old wood finally splitting after years of quiet pressure. No sobs, no rage. Just the sound of someone realizing, alone, that they've been holding up the world for someone who never planned to stand on their own. Morning crept in quietly, the light pushing through the hotel curtains like it was asking permission to enter. Diana hadn't really slept. She'd rested, yes. Eyes closed, limbs still, but her mind had been wide awake, moving through decades of memories like leafing through old letters she never meant to reread. The sunlight hit the edge of her phone on the nightstand. Still no call, no apology, not even a lazy, "Hey, I forgot." She sat up slowly, her body stiff but her focus sharp. There was a moment right there as her feet touched the carpet when something clicked. Not a burst of rage. Not a wave of grief, just a decision. She pulled her laptop from her suitcase, powered it on, and opened a folder labeled simply, "Important." Inside were scanned copies of her will, her power of attorney forms, her medical directives, every legal string that tied her to Jordan. All of them still listed him as her emergency contact, her executor, her beneficiary. She stared at the screen and felt it again. That steady, creeping realization. It wasn't that she had handed him power. It was that he had expected it, and never once earned it. With calm, practiced hands, she began updating each document. Not in a rush, not with bitterness, just with certainty. A quiet rewriting of the narrative. Jordan's name disappeared line by line. In his place, she entered the name of her neighbor, Lillian, someone who had driven her to doctor's appointments, shoveled her sidewalk without being asked, brought her soup when she had the flu. Not flashy, just present. She revised her will, too. The new draft redirected her estate to a split between her church, a local women's shelter, and a literacy nonprofit. Not revenge, just realignment. By the time the sun had risen fully, Diana had printed everything and signed each page in careful, looping strokes. Her hand didn't tremble. There was no drama in the room, no music swelling, no applause. Just the sound of a woman reclaiming what had quietly been taken from her for years. She slid the stack of papers into a fresh manila folder and labeled it, "Updated, do not override." Then she placed it beside her suitcase. And for the first time in decades, she felt like her name, just her name, was finally enough to stand on its own. Diana didn't storm out of Atlanta. She didn't slam any doors, didn't send any dramatic texts, didn't make a public post explaining her side. She simply packed her things, checked out of the hotel a day early, and caught the next flight back to Tennessee. When the plane touched down in Knoxville, she didn't feel victorious. She felt still. And in that stillness, something began to root. The next week, she met with her lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Jean Carter, with silver-streaked hair and a spine made of stone. Together, they reviewed the revised will and finalized the paperwork. Jean didn't ask why Diana was changing everything. She didn't have to. She just nodded once and said, "About time." Later that afternoon, Diana walked into her bank and closed the last joint account still connected to Jordan's name. The young teller smiled politely and asked, "Closing due to fraud?" Diana just replied, "No," finally choosing peace. Then she drove, not home, but into the Smoky Mountains. There, nestled between tall pines and winding gravel roads, was a small cedar cabin she had seen listed on a community board months earlier. She'd bookmarked it then, not knowing why. Now she knew. It wasn't fancy. One bedroom, a wood stove, windows that caught the sunrise just right. But it was hers. She signed the rental agreement on the spot, paid 6 months up front, no co-signers, no backup plans, just Diana. The next morning, she woke to birdsong instead of bills. She made her own coffee, painted her toenails in the sunshine, and registered for an art class at the local community center, watercolors for women over 60. The instructor, a cheerful woman named Eloise, reminded her of someone she used to be. By the end of the first class, she'd made 2 new friends. One was a retired nurse who had raised 3 boys alone. The other had left a marriage after 40 years of being invisible. They didn't trade horror stories. They traded laughter and recipes. Diana didn't talk about Jordan. She didn't have to. Here, she wasn't someone's mother. She wasn't a cautionary tale or a forgotten ride at an airport curb. She was just a woman in a quiet cabin, beginning again. And every sunrise that spilled through her kitchen window whispered the same thing. You didn't need noise to make a comeback. It had been 3 months since the airport. Diana hadn't heard Jordan's voice since that day. There were a few texts, short, guilty pings that came at odd hours. "Didn't mean to miss you. Can we talk? Are you okay?" She read them once and never replied. Not because she was angry, because she was finally full. Her days in the mountains fell into a gentle rhythm. Early walks with coffee in hand, watercolor sessions in the sunroom, quiet dinners with friends who didn't need explanations. No one asked her to explain why she lived alone now. No one tried to define her by what she'd lost. She'd stopped thinking in terms of loss anyway. The cabin, once just a temporary escape, had become something sturdier, a foundation. She planted lavender by the steps, hung a wind chime outside the kitchen window. She even adopted a small mutt from the shelter who refused to answer to anything but waffles. And one Tuesday afternoon, as the breeze carried the scent of spring and wet earth, a letter arrived. Handwritten, no return address. Inside, "Mom, I didn't know how much I relied on you until you disappeared. I didn't know what it cost you. I'm sorry, no signature." But she knew the handwriting. She folded the letter and tucked it in the back of her journal, not to hold on to hope, but as a reminder of who she used to be. The woman who said yes even when it hurt. The woman who kept showing up even when no one met her halfway. She didn't need apologies anymore. She needed integrity, her own. That Sunday, her art group held a community showcase. Diana submitted 3 watercolor pieces, one of her cabin in fog, one of her morning coffee on the porch, and one of an empty road at dusk. She titled that last one, "The Way Back to Myself." It won no prize, but it drew quiet stares. After the show, a woman approached her, early 60s, soft-spoken, teary-eyed. She whispered, "I saw myself in your painting." Diana smiled gently. "Me too." That night, as she stood on the porch brushing Waffle's ears and watching the fireflies blink across the field, she felt no ache for what didn't happen, no bitterness for what was taken, just a quiet, glorious knowing. She had chosen herself, and that was the most powerful inheritance of all. Have you ever reached a point where silence said more than words? Diana's story isn't just hers, it echoes in the lives of so many women who gave and gave until there was nothing left. If you've ever felt invisible, forgotten, or finally brave enough to choose yourself, tell us in the comments, what was the moment you realized you were done being the safety net? Your voice matters, and maybe, just maybe, someone out there needs to hear it today.